There was a scream, a splash, and then complete silence, except for the frogs croaking as Karen's $12,000 camo-wrapped ATV slowly sank beneath the lily pads in my backyard pond. One moment she was airborne, blonde hair flying like a shampoo commercial gone rogue. The next she was swallowed by 2 feet of water and a lifetime of bad decisions. I didn't move. I just stood on my porch with my coffee, blinking like I'd just hallucinated the world's most ridiculous neighborhood stunt. 10 seconds later, her head popped up, hair matted with algae, eyes wide with betrayal, as if I had somehow orchestrated her flight into the drink. She screamed, "You're gonna pay for this," while flinging pond scum at the sky. And that, as absurd as it sounds, was the exact moment I knew I'd be in court within a week. Karen had moved into our peaceful little rural neighborhood 6 months earlier, and the sound of tranquility had been replaced by the constant roar of her overpowered ATV ever since. She wasn't just loud, she was aggressively entitled, the kind of person who thought owning something meant owning everything she could see. Her property bordered mine by about 30 yards of trees and a footpath. That path used to be a quiet trail I maintained for walking my dog and watering the koi pond I'd built by hand. Karen saw it once, decided it looked fun, and began tearing through it like a wannabe motocross star. Every attempt I made to reason with her was met with sarcasm, finger-pointing, or flat-out laughter. The final straw came when I installed wooden signs along the trail saying "Private Property" and "Keep Off Trail." She ripped one down, snapped it over her knee, and left it on my porch like a calling card. The HOA did nothing. Why would they? Karen's cousin Mitch had just been voted in as vice president and clearly decided that nepotism trumped neighborly decency. So I escalated the only way I knew how, quietly and legally. I reinforced my property markers. I added reflective paint to the signs. I even installed a couple of solar lights and a trail camera, not because I expected a dramatic incident, but just to document her repeated trespasses. I'd lived here nearly 15 years, and my home was my sanctuary. I wasn't about to let it become Karen's personal racetrack. That Saturday started off like any other. The morning sun was golden, the birds were out, and I was sipping a fresh cup of coffee on the porch when I heard the familiar high-pitched rev of Karen's ATV. But this time, it wasn't just her. A whole group of women stood at the edge of her property line, her yoga club, it turned out, giggling and cheering her on. Karen, decked out in a pink athletic suit with sunglasses so big they belonged on a ski slope, was revving the engine like she was about to perform at the X Games. I didn't think much of it at first, just another noisy moment to ignore. But then she pointed directly toward the trail that cut across my land, and I heard her shout over the engine, "Watch this, ladies! Redneck rally time!" My stomach dropped. Karen gunned it. The ATV kicked up dirt as she launched forward, ignoring every posted sign. I stood up, coffee forgotten. She hit the path full speed, bounced once, and then, because fate loves drama, hit the irrigation trench I'd recently dug. It wasn't large, just a shallow rut about 2 feet deep and hidden in the morning shadows. But at the speed she was going, it was the perfect makeshift ramp. Her front wheels launched, the whole machine caught air, and for 3 glorious seconds, Karen was flying. The ATV arced through the air like a lawn dart from hell and splashed down directly into the pond with a massive splorch. Water shot up like a geyser. Fish scattered. Frogs leapt from lily pads in panic. For a moment, I couldn't even process it. My brain played it back in slow motion like a sports replay. Karen, blonde hair flying, mouth wide open, ATV twisting in the air. Then a full-body dive into the one spot in the yard she'd never dared trespass before. She flailed. She coughed. She screamed. The women watching from her property stared in horror, one of them fumbling with a phone. Karen finally managed to crawl to the bank, looking like something that had just crawled out of a swamp. Her designer jacket was soaked, her sunglasses were missing, and her phone, which she kept in a pink chest holster, was bubbling under the surface somewhere with my koi. And of course, in classic Karen fashion, the first thing she did wasn't apologize. She pointed a shaking, algae-covered finger at me and shouted, "You're gonna pay for this! You set me up!" She truly believed it. She believed I had dug a trench specifically to launch her into my pond, that I had booby-trapped my own backyard just to spite her. She screamed at her friends to call the police. I calmly walked back inside, grabbed a towel, and came back out, not for her, but for me, because I was about to fall over laughing. By the time the sheriff arrived, Karen had somehow twisted her ankle, developed a backache, and insisted she had minor memory loss due to pond trauma. She was sitting on the lawn like a washed-up mermaid of vengeance, muttering legal threats and demanding an ambulance. The deputy, who knew me well, just gave me a tired look and asked, "Do you have the footage?" I handed him the SD card from the trail cam. 2 hours later, the tow truck arrived for her waterlogged ATV, now covered in green slime and smelling like mildew. Karen limped after it like it was a fallen war hero, cursing me under her breath and snapping pictures of my property with her backup phone. I watched it all from my porch again, this time with a second cup of coffee and the neighbor's dog at my feet. The last thing I heard that day was her voice echoing through the trees. "I'm calling my lawyer." Of course she was. Of course she would turn her own idiotic crash into a lawsuit. And sure enough, a week later, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox. Karen was suing me, for damages to her ATV, for emotional trauma, for reckless landscaping, and even for ecosystem contamination from hazardous koi waste. I stared at the papers for a long moment, then looked out at my pond where the koi were lazily swimming under the sun. I could only shake my head. Karen wasn't done crashing. She was just switching lanes, from physical destruction to legal absurdity. But if she wanted war, she was going to learn something about me real fast. I play quiet, but I play to win. The lawsuit was laughable at first glance, but the moment I saw Karen had actually retained a lawyer, I stopped chuckling. Her ex-husband, to be specific, a greasy, balding man named Darren who once handed out business cards at a funeral. According to local gossip, he'd lost most of his clientele after a series of ethical violations, including representing both sides of a divorce and somehow losing custody of his own dog. But apparently, for Karen, he was good enough. The paperwork was thick with exaggerated language, claiming I had intentionally engineered a malicious environmental trap, and that I exhibited hostile landscaping behavior with intent to harm. The phrases were so absurd they almost sounded poetic, like some Shakespearean villain had taken up lawn care. And yet, I knew better than to underestimate the chaos Karen could summon. What she lacked in brains, she made up for in pure, unfiltered audacity. After reading the complaint 3 times and pinching myself to make sure this wasn't a weird dream, I called Nina. Nina was sharp, relentless, and had the kind of legal experience that made people like Darren break into a nervous sweat. She also had a personal grudge against Karen. Years ago, Nina had been HOA President and led a successful campaign to pass noise ordinances. Karen, back then just a distant cousin of someone in the neighborhood, had thrown a tantrum so loud it ended up in a local newspaper's Weirdest HOA Moments column. Nina never forgot the face, and when I explained what had happened, she practically skipped down the courthouse steps to take my case. We met the next morning in her office, where she read through the complaint with a combination of disbelief and morbid amusement. By the end, she had her reading glasses pushed up and was massaging her temples like she had just watched a 3-hour soap opera on fast forward. "She's suing you for psychological trauma," she said dryly, "because she drove a recreational vehicle off a cliff she ignored multiple signs about." I nodded. "And wants you to pay for her custom paint job emotional loss." Another nod. "And she claims koi waste endangered her boots." I tried not to smile. Nina let out a long exhale and said, "We're going to destroy them." Karen, meanwhile, had taken her victim act to social media. She posted selfies in an arm sling, a neck brace, and once, bafflingly, with crutches, even though her injury was supposedly an ankle sprain. her posts were dramatic tales of betrayal and environmental sabotage, painting me as a bitter recluse who hated women with freedom. She referred to her pond plunge as the incident and started using hashtags like #JusticeForKaren and #PondTrauma. I was tagged in more than a dozen videos, some showing heavily edited slow-motion clips of her flying through the air set to sad piano music. But the internet, thankfully, didn't buy it. One user dubbed her Pond Karen and edited the footage with frog croaks and banjo music. That version went viral. By the end of the week, her hashtags had been hijacked with memes of her riding a koi fish into battle. In the background, however, Karen was busy working another angle, the HOA. Her cousin Mitch, as newly appointed vice president, suddenly sent me a notice citing violations on my property. They accused me of improper water containment, non-regulated vegetation, and the real kicker, unauthorized topographic manipulation, which, as far as I could tell, was HOA speak for digging a ditch. Mitch followed it up with a proposed fine of $5,000 and a demand that I fill in the dangerous pond feature to meet updated safety codes. This pond had existed peacefully for more than a decade, admired by neighbors and even used by firefighters as a backup water source. But now it was public enemy number one. I wasn't surprised. Karen had a gift for weaponizing bureaucracy. But this time, she'd aimed her drama cannon in the wrong direction. I met with Nina again, this time at the county records office. She pulled the permits for the pond, dated and approved long before Karen's subdivision even existed. It turned out the land had once been zoned for agricultural use, and the pond itself was originally registered under the county's emergency response infrastructure. Not only was it legal, but removing it could technically violate county water management code. Nina grinned like a wolf. They want war? We'll give them paperwork hell. Things escalated from there. Karen's lawyer, clearly enjoying the attention and clinging to his last shreds of dignity, began sending daily emails filled with demands. He wanted a full financial breakdown of my property improvements. He wanted access to the irrigation system. At one point, he actually asked for a detailed fish inventory. Nina responded once with, "No, your client is not entitled to count the koi," and never replied again. The HOA board, pressured by Karen, held a vote to force me into compliance, but enough neighbors showed up in protest to shut it down. Karen stormed out of that meeting in full brace and crutch costume, dramatically yelling, "You're all enabling a terrorist landscaper." In the midst of the chaos, a new player emerged. One of my neighbors, Carla, had been live-streaming wildlife footage from her backyard bird cam. Her camera, aimed at the woods and pond for years, had accidentally caught the entire ATV incident in 4K quality. From a side angle even my trail cam couldn't match. It showed everything. Karen's revving. Her friends egging her on. Her screaming, "Watch this!" before ignoring the signs and charging forward. Even the moment her ATV hit the trench and she laughed, "Airborne, baby!" before promptly launching into the pond. When Carla showed me the footage, I nearly dropped my coffee again. We transferred the file to Nina, who watched it twice and said, "This isn't just evidence. This is the trial-ending nuke." We had crystal clear, real-time proof that Karen had knowingly ignored every warning, endangered herself, and still tried to blame everyone else. Even better? The video caught her saying, "If I crash, I'm totally suing. Mitch said they can't stop me." Nina's eyes lit up. That's collusion, baby. So now, armed with permit records, legal documentation, HOA overreach receipts, viral memes, and a damning 4K video, we were ready to go to court. I wasn't nervous. I was exhausted, amused, and just a little excited, because what started as a splash had become a tidal wave. And Karen? She was about to learn what happens when you try to sue logic, karma, and koi fish. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, a little too intimate for a drama that had taken over the entire neighborhood. Karen walked in like she was entering a movie premiere. She wore a white neck brace that looked freshly tightened, dark sunglasses indoors, and carried a massive folder of what she clearly believed were incriminating documents. Darren followed her like a dog that had been kicked too many times but still hoped for a biscuit. I sat calmly next to Nina, who wore a navy blazer and the expression of someone about to dissect a science experiment she already knew the answer to. We weren't worried. We were locked and loaded, with enough proof to bury this farce in paperwork until the next ice age. The judge was a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for cutting through theatrics like a chef through soft butter. She raised an eyebrow the moment Karen dramatically adjusted her brace while giving the courtroom a sad little sigh. Darren opened with a statement that was somehow both emotional and confusing, painting Karen as a victim of a calculated landscape weapon and accusing me of installing deceptive topographical hazards with malicious engineering. The phrase alone sounded like it belonged in a spy thriller, not a civil court. I watched the judge's mouth twitch just slightly, like she was holding back a laugh. That was our first small victory. Nina stood and delivered our counter like a hammer wrapped in velvet. She calmly explained the pond's history, the legal permits, the reflective warning signs, and Karen's history of trespassing and defiance. When she brought up the HOA's strange involvement, she carefully referenced Mitch's personal connection to the plaintiff, letting the implications settle without needing to say the word corruption. But the real show began when Nina submitted the trail cam footage and Carla's pristine 4K livestream video. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the judge watched with sharp eyes as Karen's ATV roared across the screen, her voice crystal clear, shouting, "Watch this!" followed by her friends giggling and her enthusiastic airborne, "Baby!" just before the splash. The room was silent for 5 full seconds when it ended, broken only by the creak of Karen's chair as she shifted uncomfortably. Karen whispered something to Darren, who looked like he'd just remembered an unpaid parking ticket from 1997. He stood, stammered something about the footage being edited, and requested a continuance to verify authenticity. The judge shot that down fast. This was recorded in real time from a third-party wildlife cam and matches the defendant's trail camera perfectly. I don't see any evidence of tampering. I do, however, see evidence of reckless behavior and complete disregard for private property. Karen's mouth opened like a goldfish, and for once she didn't have a comeback. Then came the witness statement. Carla was called to the stand and delivered her testimony with the dry tone of someone who'd seen too much neighborhood nonsense in her lifetime. She explained the placement of her camera, her history of live-streaming birds and squirrels, and how she had initially recorded the incident thinking it was just more of Karen's usual antic. The judge asked if she had any prior disputes with Karen, to which Carla calmly replied, "Only when she borrowed my kayak and filled it with grass clippings." Said she was making a natural spa. Even the bailiff chuckled. Karen took the stand last. Darren tried to guide her through a rehearsed narrative, but she couldn't help herself. She kept improvising, adding more dramatic flourishes with every sentence. She claimed she had been emotionally provoked by the aggressive stance of a lawn gnome, said my koi fish, glared at her with malevolence, and insisted the signs on the trail were ambiguous and possibly in a foreign language. Nina cross-examined her with surgical precision, gently unraveling each lie with a calm smile and a stack of documents. When Nina asked if Karen had read any of the signs before riding through, Karen claimed she didn't see them. Nina pulled up a photo showing Karen flipping off one of the signs the day before the crash. It was hard to argue she hadn't seen it when she was literally posing next to it. The final blow came when Nina read Karen's own text message aloud, one that she had sent to a friend, bragging about her ATV pond jump. The message ended with, "If I crash, I'll sue. My cousin says they can't touch me." That was it. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The judge scribbled something furiously into her notes, then called for a brief recess. I walked outside with Nina, who sipped her coffee with the calm satisfaction of a cat that had just knocked over a fishbowl. When the judge returned, her tone had shifted. Gone was the slight amusement. Now she was stern, crisp, and ready to deliver a verdict. She dismissed Karen's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled. She also referred the matter to the district attorney for possible charges of perjury and filing a frivolous lawsuit. And then, she turned to the HOA. In a completely unexpected twist, the judge announced that she had reviewed the HOA's citations against me and found them to be suspiciously timed and procedurally flawed. She ordered a temporary injunction against the HOA's enforcement powers pending a full review. Mitch, who had been sitting in the gallery trying to look invisible, turned pale. I leaned back, taking in the moment. Not only had Karen lost the case, but her cousin's grip on the HOA was about to be publicly dismantled. Karen stormed out of the courtroom as fast as her brace and fake limp would allow, ripping off her sunglasses and muttering curses. Darren followed her, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Nina turned to me and said, "Told you she'd sink herself." But the story didn't end there. Because Karen, ever persistent in her foolishness, wasn't going to take the loss quietly. A few days later, a community email blast went out, an anonymous tip accusing me of running an illegal koi trafficking ring out of my backyard pond. I stared at the email for a full minute before laughing so hard I nearly choked on my tea. Someone had taken a picture of my pond with a blurry zoom lens and annotated it with red circles around the fish, calling them unlicensed aquatic imports. I called Nina again, who laughed even harder. "Let her keep digging," she said. "Eventually, she'll hit water again." It was clear Karen wasn't done flailing, but now she was grasping at anything she could use to stay relevant. The community, however, had seen everything. They weren't buying her drama anymore. And as for me, I had become something of a legend in the neighborhood. People started calling the pond Karen's dive site. A few kids even made a cardboard ATV and reenacted the jump during a block party. Carla gifted me a framed still from her 4K video, complete with a speech bubble that read, "Airborne, baby." I hung it proudly in my living room, because when you survive a Karen lawsuit with koi fish, memes, and dignity intact, you deserve to laugh. And you deserve to win. Word about the court verdict traveled faster than Karen's ATV ever did. By the time I got home that day, there were at least 4 congratulatory cupcakes on my porch from neighbors, each with some variation of Pond 1, Karen 0 scrawled in frosting. One neighbor had even set up a folding chair by the pond with a handmade sign reading, "VIP seating. Watch where entitlement lands you." What began as a personal nuisance had turned into a full-blown community event, and oddly enough, I wasn't even the main character anymore. Karen was. Or rather, the caricature of her that had now become neighborhood folklore. But beneath the humor and the petty revenge, something bigger was unfolding, and I hadn't realized just how deep the roots of this chaos went until the following week when the HOA came knocking again. Despite the judge's temporary injunction, Mitch wasn't ready to go quietly. He had called an emergency HOA meeting, supposedly to address ongoing safety violations in the community. But everyone knew what it was really about, saving his seat and protecting his cousin from total embarrassment. Nina advised me to attend, not because I needed to defend myself, but because she suspected they might try to twist the narrative. She was right. The moment I walked into the community hall, Mitch was already on a microphone, red-faced and sweating, trying to paint himself as a victim of unprecedented slander. He pointed to a board covered in photos of the pond, copies of the lawsuit papers, and somehow, a printout of Karen's viral meme where she was photoshopped riding a koi like a rodeo bull. He accused me of deliberate manipulation of digital narratives and said the HOA needed to reclaim its authority. Most people in the room just stared at him like he'd lost his mind. A few politely sipped their coffee. Then someone from the back shouted, "Hey Mitch, didn't you sign off on her ATV event?" That caused a ripple of whispers and laughter. Mitch's ears turned crimson. He mumbled something about procedural ambiguity and tried to steer the conversation to community unity, but it was too late. Carla stood up and asked how many other HOA actions were based on favoritism. Another neighbor asked why the HOA never responded to complaints about Karen's noise violations. And then the floodgates opened. People started sharing stories. Karen borrowing tools and never returning them. Karen yelling at a retiree for using a leaf blower. Karen organizing a dog fashion show in someone else's front yard without asking permission. The tales kept pouring out, each more ridiculous than the last. It became obvious that this wasn't just about one lawsuit or one ATV incident. Karen had been building resentment like a dam about to burst, and the court loss had been the final crack. Nina, seated beside me, whispered, "They're impeaching him without even needing a vote." By the end of the night, a petition had begun circulating. Mitch, flustered and humiliated, declared the meeting adjourned and practically ran out the door. Karen, who had snuck into the back mid-meeting wearing a hoodie and oversized sunglasses, tripped over a folding chair on her way out, earning a scattered round of applause. But of course, Karen wasn't finished. That would have been too simple. A few days later, I received a notice. Karen had filed a police report claiming I'd digitally harassed her by facilitating the spread of defamatory content. She accused me of encouraging the meme culture that mocked her pond dive. I stared at the paper in disbelief. She was trying to sue me for what the internet had done in its own brutal, meme-loving fashion. She even included screenshots of Twitter posts and TikTok clips she had never proven I had anything to do with. Some weren't even mine. One was posted by a user named PondWrecker69 who, from their profile picture, was clearly a teenager in another state. I brought the report to Nina. She laughed so hard she had to set down her coffee. "She's weaponizing meme culture," she said, wiping her eyes. "This is either genius or insanity. Possibly both." Still, we filed a counter-report outlining harassment, misuse of legal systems, and false claims. At this point, Karen was just throwing darts in the dark, hoping one might land. But she wasn't prepared for what came next. A letter arrived at her door, not from us but from the county attorney's office. They had reviewed her court behavior, the attempted HOA manipulations, and now the false police report. They were opening an investigation into malicious litigation. Karen, who had spent weeks puffing herself up as a martyr, now found herself facing potential fines and sanctions. The irony was almost poetic. After trying to drown me in legal nonsense, she was the one now neck-deep in it. Meanwhile, I decided to reclaim my peace in the most therapeutic way I knew: pond renovations. I hired a few local guys to expand the pond slightly and add a new solar-powered fountain in the center. It wasn't just a renovation. It was a statement. The neighborhood watched the transformation with glee. A few kids painted a wooden sign that read "Karen's Final Landing Zone," which I eventually replaced with a proper plaque that said, "Private Property. Respect the Splash." My koi pond, once a serene sanctuary, had now become a landmark, a symbol of boundary enforcement, neighborly patience, and poetic justice. One day, while I was supervising the fountain installation, a delivery truck rolled up with a package addressed to the pond guy. It was from a local artist, one I didn't know. Inside was a hand-sculpted ceramic figurine of a woman on an ATV midair, complete with flying hair and a surprised expression. It was captioned, "Flight Risk." I placed it near the edge of the pond, just visible enough to draw a chuckle but subtle enough to not seem vengeful. Even humor, I figured, should have its boundaries. Karen, meanwhile, had gone quiet. No more social media outbursts, no more HOA ambushes. Rumor had it she was staying with family in another town while trying to reset her online reputation. But by then, the story had already spread too far. She had become a cautionary tale in online forums, a topic in local college communications classes, even a brief mention in a podcast about the most ridiculous real-life lawsuits. I had won, yes. But more than that, I had witnessed something rarely seen in real time: how entitlement, when left unchecked, doesn't just hurt others. It devours the person holding it. Karen thought she could bend reality, neighbors, and even the law to her will. But she didn't count on one thing: people fighting back. Not with vengeance. Just with truth, evidence, and a little humor sprinkled on top. The koi swam in lazy circles. The fountain sparkled in the afternoon light. My backyard was peaceful again. And just to be safe, I added one more sign, direct, simple, and clear. It read, "No ATVs. No exceptions. No Karens." Time passed. The season shifted from the fiery golds of fall into the soft gray chill of winter, and the Karen saga slowly dissolved into neighborhood lore. People moved on, the memes faded, and the koi pond returned to its tranquil rhythm. The incident became a humorous footnote in block party conversations and a cautionary tale told to new residents. Every so often, someone would bring up the story with a chuckle, usually beginning with the words, "Remember when she flew?" and ending with laughter. Life settled back into its peaceful routine. But if I had learned anything from the past few months, it was that calm never lasted long when Karen was involved. One cold morning, as I was clearing leaves near the pond's edge, I heard the unmistakable growl of an engine in the distance. My heart sank, not from fear, but from weary expectation. Sure enough, crawling along the back trail like a horror movie villain who didn't know when to quit, was Karen. This time, no ATV. Just her, bundled in a bulky coat, carrying what looked like a manila folder and a determined scowl. She stopped just outside my property line, seemingly aware that crossing it now came with consequences. I watched her from the porch, coffee in hand, waiting to see what fresh absurdity she'd brought with her. She didn't speak at first. She just held the folder in the air like a strange peace offering and shouted, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk." That was new. Karen didn't talk. She accused, threatened, and stormed. Cautiously, I walked over to the edge of my yard, careful not to step beyond the marker stones I'd had installed after the lawsuit. She looked different. Less theatrical, more tired. The fire that once powered her crusade seemed dulled, like a candle struggling against a breeze. She opened the folder and held up a document. "I'm dropping everything," she said. "The appeal. The police complaint. The HOA nonsense. All of it." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, slowly. I thought maybe if you sign this, it could be mutual. A legal agreement. You don't go after me for harassment or damages, and I don't show up again. Ever. It wasn't an apology. But for Karen, it was as close as she was capable of. I took the folder, looked through it. Nina had prepared me for this possibility, some last-ditch attempt at salvaging dignity. I told her I'd have my attorney review it. She nodded and walked away without another word, boots crunching through the frost-covered grass. True to her word, she disappeared. No more sightings, no more rants, no surprise HOA motions. Nina reviewed the documents and confirmed they were legitimate. I signed, submitted the paperwork, and just like that, the final chapter seemed to close. But the story hadn't ended, not really. Because weeks later, something unexpected happened that no one could have predicted. I was sitting on my porch during an unseasonably warm afternoon when a man in a crisp blazer pulled up in a black SUV. He introduced himself as Paul Rivera, a local documentary filmmaker working on a short series about bizarre civil court cases and community justice. He'd stumbled upon the Karen lawsuit through online forums and viral video compilations. He asked if I'd be willing to be interviewed for the episode. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He had paperwork, a production schedule, and even a camera crew waiting in the next town over. At first, I declined. I didn't want to drag it all up again. But then he said the magic words, "You control the narrative." That night, I called Carla and told her the story might be getting a second life. She laughed so hard she dropped her tea and immediately offered up her original 4K footage. "If we're telling the story," she said, "we're telling it right." Over the next few days, Paul recorded interviews with neighbors, legal experts, even Nina, who managed to explain the entire trial while casually shredding Karen's legal arguments with a smile. The documentary was meant to be humorous but grounded, a reflection of how absurdity could spiral when common sense lost its seat at the table. When the short film finally aired online, it blew up faster than anyone expected. It was titled Flight Risk: The Karen Who Sued a Pond, and within 3 days, it had over 2 million views. Comment sections exploded. People quoted lines from the court transcripts, debated whether Karen deserved a parachute, and praised the calm logic of Nina's courtroom smackdown. Even the ceramic pond figurine made a cameo in the final shot. My once quiet backyard had become internet famous again. And then, perhaps most surprising of all, came an email. It was from Karen. It was short. Just 2 lines. I saw the documentary. You could have made me look worse. You didn't. Thank you. I stared at the screen, rereading the words, waiting for the hidden insult or legal threat that never came. Maybe she'd learned something. Maybe not. But either way, she was finally, truly gone from my life. Spring rolled around. The pond bloomed with lily pads and fresh algae. The koi swam lazily under the surface, unbothered by the drama that once disrupted their quiet world. Neighbors still occasionally brought it up, usually with a grin and a shake of the head. The HOA, now under new leadership, even held a community picnic beside the pond to celebrate peace, property boundaries, and personal accountability. I didn't host it, but I let them set up tables on the far side of the yard. Everyone brought snacks. No one brought an ATV. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, I walked to the edge of the pond and looked out over the water. The ceramic figurine still stood by the bank, faded slightly from the sun. I thought about removing it but decided against it. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a reminder that boundaries matter, that truth holds, that sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't revenge at all. It's dignity, resilience, and the ability to sit by your pond, sip your coffee, and smile. A dragonfly landed on the tip of a lily pad. The water rippled gently. Somewhere in the distance, I heard kids laughing and a lawnmower starting up. Life was normal again. But it had been changed in the oddest, funniest, and most dramatic way possible. Not because of the crash, not because of the lawsuit, but because of what came after. Community, clarity, and the unexpected realization that even the wildest stories can have peaceful endings. You just have to outwim the chaos, and, if possible, build a good pond.